presentation in our Arts and Medicine Monday lecture series. We've been getting some questions about communications and presentations. Almost all of these presentations are recorded and available on our website, www.coloradobioethics.org. And we would love to have you on our mailing list. Malia has put a link in the chat for you to sign up if you are not on the mailing list currently. My name is Tess Jones. I'm the Director of the Arts and Humanities and Healthcare program here at the Center for Bioethics and Humanities. And our speaker today has been one of our most popular and informative presenters for many years in this series. Professor Emeritus Joe Gall graduated from high school in Budapest, Hungary, attended college at the American University in Cairo, Egypt, and made his way to the United States to complete a PhD in chemistry at the University of California, Davis. During his long and accomplished career as a faculty member in the CU School of Medicine, Professor Gall taught, he conducted research, and he directed the drug analysis lab. His interests include the history of science, the history of chemical warfare, and he has certainly presented on that for us in the past, as well as myriad ethical and moral challenges in science and human affairs, such as today's presentation on the Dreyfus affair, a lesson for our time. Please post your questions and comments in the chat, and we'll share those with Professor Gall if we run short of time today. So join me in welcoming Professor Joe Gall.
Thank you, Tess, for that very kind introduction. Greatly appreciated. And I think with that, I should start the presentation. So I'm going to go to here and which one? Let's do this one. Okay, and this is in the show mode, and we can get started.
Looks good, Joe.
The Dreyfus affair, a lesson for our time. First, I would like to express my gratitude to several people, all of them at the Anschutz campus. Tess Jones, a PhD Director of the Arts and Humanities in Healthcare program for the Center for Bioethics. David Weil, Manager of Operations and Educational Technology at the Center for Bioethics. Also, Malaya Himber, External Relations Professional at the Center for Bioethics. And finally, Mark Levine, Clinical Professor of Medicine, Faculty Associate, also at the Center for Bioethics and Humanities. Thank you all for your help and contribution. Our lecture today is about history. When history comes up, I think one of the first questions people wonder about is, why study history? After all, history is the past. It has happened. It cannot be changed. Why on earth would be interested in something like that? And an excellent answer was given to this question by George Santayana, a Spanish-American philosopher who in 1905 wrote the following: "Those who do not remember the past are condemned to repeat it." And this warning is particularly relevant to the subject that I will present today. And I certainly hope to show that something that happened over a century ago is relevant for today and a warning for today. So how do I lower these? Okay, yeah, it's covering the text. Our subject matter is Alfred Dreyfus. He came from a wealthy French Jewish family, originally from a region of France called Alsace, indicated here, shown where it is. It's in the northeastern part of France. His father was an industrialist, and he was the youngest of 7 children. In 1871, after the Franco-Prussian War, the region of Alsace was annexed by the victorious Germany in the war. At that point, many French people who were living in Alsace decided to leave Alsace and move to France because they didn't want to become German. They wanted to remain French. Among these people was the Dreyfus family, and they, in 1872, they moved to Paris and left Alsace. At the time, Dreyfus was 13 years old, and he decided right there and then to be a French army officer to serve his beloved country. Here is a photograph of him in his school uniform at age 14 in 1873. In 1880, Dreyfus graduated as an engineer from the École Polytechnique in French. It's a polytechnic institute. It's an institute of technology, and it was an institute connected to the French army. Dreyfus was then admitted as a second lieutenant to the artillery and engineering school, and this one too was, of course, military connected. In 1889, he was promoted to the rank of captain. And in 1890, he married Lucie Adamar, and the couple went on to have 2 children. Then Dreyfus was admitted to the War College. And in 92, he graduated ranked ninth out of 81 candidates. In 1893, he became a trainee in the general staff of the army, and he was then the only Jewish trainee. And the Dreyfus affair begins. The French military intelligence department, which was, as the indication shows, intelligence spy agency, its official name was the statistics section. For obvious reasons, they took a name that had nothing to do with spying. They needed to hide the fact that this agency's job is spying and intelligence. So it was a statistics section of the general staff, and it employed a cleaning woman as a spy in the German embassy. So this woman worked for the statistics section spy service. She was a spy for them, and she was working ostensibly as a cleaning lady in the German embassy in Paris. In September 94, this woman, while doing her job, found a torn up, undated and unsigned note in the wastebasket of the German military attaché at the embassy. The note offered for sale French military secrets to the Germans. However, in hindsight, none of the information offered was secret. It was material about a French new cannon, also about French army plans for movements in southern France, but all of that had come out some years earlier. So the information offered for sale to the Germans wasn't really secret. Here is the image of this note the cleaning lady found, and here it's put together. It's the pieces are put together, and with the tape they are sealed together. As you can see, there is it's not signed and there is no date on it. The statistics section officers then in quotes, determined that the author of the note must be an artillery officer on the general staff, and they focused on Dreyfus, the only Jewish officer trainee on the general staff. The writing on the note then became of interest, and 5 handwriting experts were consulted on whether the handwriting can be attributed to Dreyfus. The 5 didn't agree. 3 claimed that yes, it is Dreyfus's handwriting on the note. 2 said that it isn't. Of the 3 that said it was Dreyfus's handwriting, however, 1 was actually not a handwriting expert at all. So his voice, his vote rather really can be discounted, and the real vote of the committee was 2 against 2. So it was undecided. In any case, regardless of that, the army believed firmly that it was Dreyfus's handwriting, the note. He's the one who offered secrets, quote unquote, to the German embassy. And on October 15th, 1994, Dreyfus was arrested on orders of the Minister of War, General Auguste Mercier. Dreyfus was charged with high treason, but Dreyfus was a most unlikely spy or traitor. Did he have animosity to France? He had none. Most French Jews were staunchly loyal to their country, the first nation in modern Europe to emancipate the Jews. And that happened in 1791, just a few years after the French Revolution of 1789. As we saw also, the Dreyfus family was very loyal to France. They moved to France after 1871 to remain French when Alsace became German. In addition, Dreyfus decided, as we saw, to serve his country as an army officer at the young age of 13, clearly signs of loyalty and patriotism for France. Did Dreyfus have financial motives to sell secrets? None, as I indicated at the beginning. He came from a rich family. In addition, he was a happily married man. He had 2 small children. And he was a graduate of 2 elite military institutions. And he also graduated from the War College with a high enough placing to obtain a prize trainee position on the general staff. And he was then clearly at the start of a promising career with no obstacle to eventually becoming a general. So the bottom line of all this is that Dreyfus had no motives for spying, for treason, and it is very clear on the basis of the evidence. However, regardless of the evidence, at that time, a vehement press campaign against Dreyfus was unleashed. This is an example of this press campaign. This is a newspaper called La Libre Parole in French. It means the free word. And this is the issue, front page of the issue of November 6, 1894, just a couple of weeks after Dreyfus was arrested. And the headline on the front page here, I don't show the whole article, the headline really tells it all: "The Treason by the Jew Dreyfus." And the anti-Dreyfus press continued to publish information leaked by the statistics section in order to force the prosecution of, quote unquote, the Jewish traitor. And at that point then, a court-martial was ordered by General Mercier, court-martial of Dreyfus. It started on December 19th, 94. And here's an image of that court-martial. At the top there, it says Dreyfus facing his judges. And we see, this is a drawing, we see Dreyfus standing here in the box of the accused. This is a lawyer making arguments. And back there are 7 officer judges of the court-martial. They are the ones that will vote guilty or not guilty. The proceedings were closed in this court-martial. The press and the public were excluded. Dreyfus protested his innocence throughout this court-martial trial. And the trial was at first not looking good for the army, simply because there, as I indicated a little earlier, there was really no evidence of his guilt. The only so-called evidence was the inconclusive handwriting, as I pointed out. Well, the Minister of War realized that they're in trouble, and then he made a decision to create a secret dossier which would, quote, prove Dreyfus's guilt. And the job was given, the job of creating this dossier that would prove Dreyfus guilty, the job was given to this officer, Major Henry. He was an officer of the statistics section. So he went ahead and forged documents implicating Dreyfus in the affair and showing him as guilty. And that's the secret dossier that he created. False documents implicating Dreyfus. And then the secret dossier was delivered to the officer judges of the court-martial. Dreyfus and his lawyer Fernand Laborie, were not told of the existence of the dossier, which was in itself a crime in French military code of justice. The accused and his lawyers had to be told everything, all the evidence that the prosecution had uncovered. They were not, and so they were breaking the law. On December 22nd, 94, Dreyfus was unanimously by the 7 officer judges convicted of collusion with a foreign power and high treason. He was sentenced to cancellation of his army rank, military degradation, and life in prison in an isolated location. Degradation was one of the things he was sentenced to. What it means in the present context is a public disgrace, a public dishonoring. And Dreyfus's degradation ceremony took place on the 5th of January, 95, in the courtyard of the War College, of which he had been a student. During this degradation, his badges, epaulettes, and buttons were torn off his uniform, and his sword was broken in half. Dreyfus, throughout the degradation, yelled out his innocence. Present,
you hit it, and it takes.
Present at the degradation ceremony were 4,000 French troops, journalists, and invited guests. Here is from the same newspaper we saw earlier, an image of the degradation of Dreyfus. And we see him standing here. Here is an officer breaking his sword in half. And the legend of this image says, the traitor degradation of Alfred Dreyfus. Here is Dreyfus immediately after the degradation ceremony. We see his epaulettes and badges and whatever he had on the uniform were all gone. And he was imprisoned on Devil's Island. Devil's Island was a French colony about 9 miles off the coast of South America, the northern coast of South America. There is severe tropical climate and extreme conditions, diseases on the island. At the time, it was said that Devil's Island was the worst place on earth. Dreyfus was the only prisoner on the island. Here is an image of his prison hut. Inside his prison, inside the hut was very small, 4 by 4 meters, very small. Not surprisingly, during the imprisonment, Dreyfus's health was severely affected. He contracted malaria. He suffered fever attacks unrelated to malaria, also dysentery, constant insomnia, infected sex bites, and it's amazing that he survived. He survived that imprisonment. In earlier times, France used Devil's Island as a prison, and something like 60% of the prisoners on Devil's Island in those earlier times died. And so eventually France closed the Devil's Island as a prison and then reopened it just to imprison Dreyfus there by himself. He never fully recovered his health afterwards. As we saw earlier, the basis for Dreyfus's conviction was fraudulent. The so-called secrets offered for sale were not secret. The documents implicating Dreyfus were forged. And so overall, there was no credible evidence of guilt. The accusers of Dreyfus were high-ranking officers of the general staff, also officers of the statistics section, and in addition, also government ministers, legislators, and others. All of them were anti-Semitic and determined to keep Dreyfus in prison. At that point then, Dreyfus's wife, Lucie Dreyfus, and his elder brother, Mathieu, engaged in a fervent campaign to obtain judicial review of Dreyfus's conviction. A major event of importance in the case occurred on the 1st of July, 1995, when Major Georges Picard was appointed chief of the statistics section. And he became a key figure in the affair. The first break in the affair occurred in 1896, when Picard discovered that the author of the note offering secrets to the German embassy, the author was not Dreyfus, but another army officer, Major Ferdinand Esterhazy. Esterhazy was a French infantry officer, and he was not on the general staff. And this shows the contradiction, a contradiction, because as we heard earlier, the statistics section predicted that the author of the note would be an artillery officer on the general staff, while Esterhazy was neither. So the statistics section was completely mistaken in their analysis. Esterhazy was a swindler, an incorrigible liar, an intriguer, a gambler, a scam artist in financial difficulty. And by the way, if you're wondering why I pronounced his name as Esterhazy, that's because even though he was French, his name was originally Austro-Hungarian, and Esterhazy is a Hungarian name, and I, having been raised in Hungary, I like to pronounce things correctly. So I say Esterhazy. It wouldn't be the French pronunciation. In any case, Esterhazy, because he was always in financial difficulty, he sold secrets to the German embassy beginning in July 94. However, the army leaders in France refused to accept the evidence of Esterhazy's guilt. In 98, finally, because the evidence was now overwhelming, Esterhazy was court-martialed. Here is an image of his court-martial. There he's standing in the box of the accused. There are the officer judges in front of him. This is a lawyer. So he was court-martialed. And here comes a shocking result. He was acquitted by the court-martial, even though, as I just explained, the evidence against him was incontrovertible. In August 98, Major Henri confessed to having forged the secret dossier documents, and he committed suicide. Here is an image of his suicide on the front page of another newspaper. Well, the army at that point was determined to silence Picard, who had dug out all this information, to silence Picard in order to keep the guilt of the officers, the army, and the ministers, their guilt in the Dreyfus affair, to keep it secret. So they went after Picard. Picard was court-martialed and imprisoned. Nevertheless, Esterhazy's role became public. And in 1898, Dreyfus's original conviction of 1894 was overturned by a court of appeals. In June 99, Dreyfus was brought back to Europe from Devil's Island, brought back to France. And in August of that year, he was court-martialed again, incredibly. The army insisted on court-martialing again, despite the clear evidence that he was innocent. And on September 9th of that year, he was convicted again, this time by a vote of 5-2 of the officer judges. And he was sentenced to 10 years in prison and military degradation. Here's a photograph of the second court-martial, and Dreyfus is sitting right there in front of his lawyers and facing the officer judges. Dreyfus thus was convicted a second time, despite clear evidence that the author of the note was Esterhazy and the secret dossier was forged by Major Henri. At that point, the president of France, Émile Loubet, had no choice but to pardon Dreyfus. The evidence was overwhelming. So on September 19th, he pardoned Dreyfus. Legally speaking, a pardon means forgiving the crime, but not the innocence. In other words, the accused is still considered having been guilty, but he's forgiven. That's what a pardon meant. And that's what was given to Dreyfus. Dreyfus, on the other hand, insisted on his innocence and that was therefore reluctant to accept a pardon, would be an admission, which would be an admission that he was guilty. He was reluctant to accept this pardon, but his health was he was very ill because of his 4 years on Devil's Island, and he had no choice but to accept the pardon. On November 17th, 99, a new amnesty bill was proposed in France covering, quote, all criminal acts of misdemeanors related to the Dreyfus affair or that have been included in a prosecution for one of these acts, end quote. This bill became a law on December 27th, 1900. The law excluded Dreyfus, thereby allowing him to seek full exoneration, but the law amnestied the criminals prosecuting Dreyfus. On July 12, 1906, Dreyfus was finally exonerated by the Supreme Court That is to say, it was recognized, therefore, that he had never been guilty and had been falsely prosecuted. He was then promoted to major and was awarded the Legion of Honor, one of the highest honors prizes in France. He was awarded the Legion of Honor on July 21st, 1906, of all places in the courtyard of the War College, where he had been degraded earlier. This is an image of him receiving the Legion of Honor. However, a year later, he retired from active service, and then his rank was reduced back to captain because he had served less than 2 years as a major. His reason for retiring was that the army refused to recognize his seniority and his retirement pay earned during the 12 years of the affair. And then World War I came around in 1914. Dreyfus was 55 years old at the time, was called up, mobilized, and he saw frontline action in major battles in World War I. This is an image of him at a site which was a location that was a site for a number of major battles in World War I. He was awarded the War Cross for his service in World War I, and he died in 1935. His wife, Lucy, 10 years later, and they are buried together in Montparnasse Cemetery in Paris. This is their tombstone, and at the top here, it says Lieutenant Colonel Alfred Dreyfus, the rank to which he had been promoted at the end of World War I. Dreyfus at the bottom here is Madame Alfred Dreyfus, his wife, that is his wife, Lucy. And interestingly, in the middle here, it said that this tombstone is dedicated to the memory of Madeleine Lévy. And who was Madeleine Lévy? Well, she was the Dreyfus's granddaughter. And during World War II, Madeleine was a resistance fighter against the German occupiers. She was arrested by the French police that collaborated with the Germans. She was handed over to the Germans, who deported her to Auschwitz, the death camp. And she died at Auschwitz at age 25. Tragic. Other aspects and broader implications of the Dreyfus affair. The affair remained a national ordeal in France for years at the end of the 19th and early in the 20th century, and also had longer term implications. It exploded as a national, social, political, legal, and ethical conflict in France, exacerbating political divisions and creating bitterly opposed pro and anti-Dreyfus camps. There was also the pro and anti-Dreyfus press, and the Dreyfus affair has resulted in a vast number of books, articles, documentary or fictional accounts in films and TV programs on the history of the affair and its implications. Many of these works were authored by French people, but some by others. An example of others is this book by Louis Bagley, an American attorney, book entitled Why the Dreyfus Affair Matters, published in 2008. Anti-Semitism, the basis of Dreyfus's prosecution, is more than 2 millennia old. This is an excellent book on the history of anti-Semitism by Phyllis Goldstein, forward by Sir Harold Evans. There were several types of anti-Semitism existing historically in France. There was the religious hatred of the, quote, killers of Christ. There was the loathing of capitalist Jews, as this poster typically indicated. There was scientific racism. i.e. that races have innate characteristics, Jews have negative characteristics. And during the Enlightenment, which was an 18th century intellectual and philosophical movement in Europe, some French philosophers, such as Voltaire, were intensely anti-Semitic, truly shocking. By the 1880s, there was a previously unseen virulent anti-Semitism in France, and France was divided into anti-Dreyfus and pro-Dreyfus France. Let's look at anti-Dreyfus France briefly. It included nationalists, monarchists, the Catholic Church, anti-Semites, xenophobes, conservatives, politicians, army enthusiasts, extreme right-wing anti-Semitic press. A leading figure of anti-Semitism in France at the time was Édouard Drumont. He was a French journalist and writer. In '86, as well before the Dreyfus affair, he authored an anti-Semitic book entitled Jewish France. In '89, still before the Dreyfus affair, he established the Anti-Semitic League of France. Here is Drumont. In '92, he launched an anti-Semitic newspaper. We saw it before, the Libre Parole, the free word. This is the issue of October 28, 1893, well before the Dreyfus affair. And it shows the typical anti-Semitic image of a Jew with a Jewish nose, embracing, holding the world. And the legend says, their homeland. The implication is that the Jews are not true patriots of their country and want to possess the world. Back to this newspaper, The Free Word. This is the part of the front page of the September 10th, 1899 issue. This is one day after Dreyfus's second conviction. And the headline says, "The traitor convicted, 10 years prison and degradation. Down with the Jews." There were amazingly eminent anti-Dreyfus writers. There were many, most of them are not known in the United States. One, however, is quite well known in the US, and that's Jules Verne, a celebrated novelist. There were some eminent anti-Dreyfus artists, such as the painter Edgar Degas and another painter, Auguste Renoir. But there was also pro-Dreyfus France. There was the pro-Dreyfus press, several newspapers, including La Petite République, which means the small republic. We'll see a bit about it in a minute. There were eminent personalities in pro-Dreyfus France, intellectuals, scientists, leftists, socialists, pro-republic individuals, politicians, artists. One of them was this fellow, Jean Jaurès, the socialist leader. He was elected member of parliament in 1893, and he galvanized the struggle of the working class. He was a giant moral figure of the left and a leading supporter of Dreyfus. He was opponent of the looming World War I, and he was assassinated on July 31st, 1914, just one day before French general mobilization for the war. Another eminent pro-Dreyfus figure was Émile Zola, a prominent French literary figure of the 19th century, novelist, playwright, journalist, and a major factor in the political liberalization of France. On January 13th, 98, Zola published J'accuse, I accuse, in a newspaper called the Aurora, which was an open letter to President Félix Faure, accusing the army of forgery and cover-up in the Dreyfus affair. This is the President Faure. Here is the newspaper L'Aurore with the article the letter by Zola, It says, I accuse, letter to the President of the Republic. The French film J'accuse, which was released in November 2019, used that word, j'accuse, I accuse, from Zola's letter. That's the title of the French film, directed by Roman Polanski, a Polish-French filmmaker. This is a publicity image of the film. This is Dreyfus and this is Picard. The screenplay was written by Polanski and a fellow named Robert Harris, and the film received many awards, including the prestigious French César Prize for Best Director. The film is based on a book by Robert Harris, an English novelist famous for his work of historical fiction. This is the book, and it appeared in 2013. It was about the Dreyfus case, obviously, and more specifically about Picard and Esterhazy. The book won the Walter Scott Prize and the American Library in Paris Book Award. Zola himself was prosecuted for accusing the army of crimes. This is a drawing of Zola in the courtroom, and that's his lawyer. Another pro-Dreyfus figure was Claude Monet, Impressionist painter. This is a self-portrait. There were pro-Dreyfus scientists and physicians, such as Georges Clemenceau, French physician, journalist, and politician, prime minister on 2 occasions, and he supported the separation of church and state. He opposed colonialism and wrote more than 600 articles in defense of Dreyfus. Another figure, pro-Dreyfus figure, was Edouard Grimaud, chemist and pharmacist by training, professor of chemistry at the Polytechnic Institute, and a member of the French Academy of Sciences. In '98, he signed a petition to Parliament requesting a revision of the Dreyfus case, and he testified for the defense in Zola's libel trial. As a result of his pro-Dreyfus stand, he was fired at his school, the Polytechnic Institute. Another eminent pro-Dreyfus figure was August Scherer-Kessner, chemist and industrialist, vice president of the Senate. He too testified for the defense in Zola's trial, and he lost re-election for Senate vice president due to his pro-Dreyfus stance. Scherer-Kessner is a great moral figure of France to this day. Some consequences of the affair in France. There were some positive results. The violence of the right-wing forces united the pro-republic democratic elements, strengthening parliamentary democracy and resulting in the defeat of the monarchists. Also, the establishment in '98 of the French League for the Defense of Rights of Man and Citizen. There was a negative effect too. The anti-Dreyfus agitation spread anti-Semitism even more widely in France, with tragic consequences during World War II. The French police and government participated in rounding up in World War II, rounding up the Jews of France to be sent to death camps in the Holocaust. Another result of the Dreyfus affair with major international implications. A reporter for a Viennese newspaper covered the Dreyfus case in Paris. He was shocked by the intensity of anti-Semitism in France and more broadly in Europe. He came to the conclusion that the only solution to the Dreyfus question is for the Jews to have their own country. This reporter is Theodor Herzl, today considered the father of Zionism, and the rest is history. The relevance of the affair for today, more than a century after the affair, virulent and often violent anti-Semitism and racism are still present in the world, frequently government-sponsored. For example, in Italy, La Lega, a far-right extremist anti-migrant party, which was recently in the government, is exerting fanatical anti-migrant agitation. In Germany, we see violent racism, anti-Semitism, anti-migrant agitation. There's a neo-Nazi party in Germany today whose German acronym is AfD. It stands for Alternatives for Germany. And shockingly, this neo-Nazi party has members in the German parliament. Here is the co-leader of the AfD party using the Nazi salute as he campaigns in Germany back in 2017. Today, the Nazi salute, unbelievable. In France, historic anti-Semitism is still present. This is just from a few days ago, a stone memorial to Simone Weil, Holocaust survivor, later Minister of Health, champion of women's rights, winner of the Legion of Honor. Her stone memorial was recently defaced, of all things, with the Nazi swastika. And here's a photograph of the stone memorial just a few days ago. In France, there is anti-Semitism today by Islamic extremists, but also widespread anti-Muslim attitude, racism against Arabs, Africans, and others. And there is in France a racist anti-Muslim party. It's called in French Rassemblement National, which means the National Rally. Previously, it was called the Front National, better known. And here is the leader today of the National Rally, Marine Le Pen. In 1983, the French government commissioned Louis Mittelberg, a sculptor, to create a statue of Dreyfus. The government intended to place the sculpture in the courtyard of the war college, but the army refused. The statue is now at a traffic circle in Paris. In Hungary, there is a racist, anti-migrant, anti-Semitic government. Also, a part of the population is racist. Recently, a number of Roma, that's the modern word for gypsies, a number of Roma were murdered by racists in Hungary. In the United States, there is Holocaust denial, anti-Semitism, anti-Jewish violence. For example, in 2017, there was a racist anti-Semitic march in Charlottesville, Virginia. 3 were killed. In 2018, there was a shooting at a Pittsburgh synagogue. 11 were killed. The shooter was Robert Bowers. In New Jersey, a kosher supermarket, there was a shooting at the supermarket in 2019, 5 killed. Anti-Asian and anti-Hispanic, anti-Muslim and anti-immigration incitement and violence exists in the United States today. This is Bowers who did the shooting. In China, government conducted persecution of the Muslim minority Uyghurs. In Myanmar, there is a government-sanctioned anti-Muslim violence against the Muslim minority, the Rohingya. Here are an image of the Rohingya fleeing the violence. In Egypt, Christian minorities, including the ancient Christian sect, the Copts, are persecuted. In Iraq, Christians and other minorities, the Yazidis, have been victims of racist and religious discrimination and violence. Last week, Amnesty International declared that Israel's treatment of the Palestinians constitutes apartheid. We conclude this tour of racial injustice and religious discrimination in the world. The tour was not comprehensive since xenophobia and racial and religious violence are present in many other countries. Our story today focused on a 19th century victim of religious discrimination, Alfred Dreyfus. He died in 1935. This is his photograph before his death. The Dreyfus Affair teaches us about the timeless evils of racism, xenophobia, and anti-Semitism, and about the imperative to combat them. Thank you.
Well, let me begin, Joe, by saying thank you to you. You're getting many accolades and many compliments through the chat. And as what's also become more and more obvious to me is as the questions have been populating in the chat, you've anticipated many of them and answered them as you've moved forward, especially when you turn to the shadow of history and really looked at the connection between the the now and the then. So I want to actually start with just a few perhaps very specific, maybe minor questions. One question that we had earlier, and let me see if I can find it, was Theodore Herzl then a journalist reporting on the first or the second Dreyfus trial? Just as a point of clarification.
Yeah.
Oh, we're having some sound problems with you. Yeah, still some sound problems with you, Joe. Not sure what's going on there.
No, no sé. No sé cómo se hace para ver escritas las preguntas.
So sorry about this. I think that fortunately we were able to get to the end of your presentation without any technical problems. But I guess you broke the internet, Joe.
¿No sabés qué hacer acá?
Well, we will capture, we will try to capture not only all of the compliments and the notes of gratitude for this. It was just so comprehensive and so beautifully done. We thank you so much. But also some of the questions that, as and many of them you already addressed, but some of the more specific ones. For instance, you mentioned the Polyansky film, which I found to be very interesting, that here is a man who himself has been exiled and who made the film. But one of the questions was, what is your favorite movie if you have looked at the Dreyfus films? And as I said, the question about Theodore Herzl. Yeah, I think we're going to have to conclude our presentation. I want to thank everybody who has attended today. Thank you, and we will get the recording of this presentation on our website likely by tomorrow. So please check in and feel free to share, and look forward to other presentations this semester. We have several what we hope will be interesting and illuminating. Joe, thank you again. You always enlighten us. You always help us think, and we appreciate your determination and your commitment to, your commitment to history. Thank you again.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, everybody.
Thanks all.
Thank you.